Hello, everyone. Welcome to Stopwatch Session number 7. I'm Ramona Canolius from Northwestern University's Culture Health Sciences Library. I'm happy to be the moderator, but I can't take credit for putting this session together on scholarly communication topics. Each speaker will introduce themselves in this Stopwatch number 7. We'll have some time for questions at the end, but because we have 5 presentations, we've got to kind of keep it moving. So I will let them introduce themselves. So thank you for attending and stick around to the end for questions.
Hello, my name is Megan Bowen Turner. I am from Athens State University. I'm the Collection and Acquisitions Librarian. Just a quick snapshot of Athens State. We were founded in 1822, and we're Alabama's oldest educational institution of higher learning. The reason for those words is that because we were a women's academy before we became a women's college, and then now what we are today, which is an upper division university. We're 1 to 2 in the U.S., and we have about 15 graduate programs and 3,000 students. So how this started, in the fall of 2022, the Department Chair of Religious Studies, Dr. Tony Moyers, came to me about having a digital space for his thesis students, mainly because he was holding all the theses in his hard drive, which they did publish the theses, and we collected them in the library and cataloged them, of course, but nobody comes to see them. But he was hoping for open access availability for students to have a bit more academic community. We also, he hoped to have the pieces hardbound as well at the moment that we're doing soft covers. So I was trying to find a solution. So I was thinking about DSpace or like having an institutional repository, but instantly got doors closed on me. No infrastructure apparently to apparently to what the IT said. So I started looking around and found that other universities were using robust thesis and dissertations as a way to hold their theses. And I was like, well, we're already subscribed, so I might as well try it. So I reached out and was actually able to create administration, create the forums, figure out what masters are actually having theses that would be submitted in the future, and was able to create something. So I went back to my director and I was like, what can we do to support our students? And so we decided as a library that we would pay for the thesis to be open access, which Northwest requires a fee for that. They do have a traditional publishing where universities that have subscription already could access the thesis, but this would give them a wider range. We were thinking about reaching out to the postgraduates to see if they wanted to participate in having their thesis in open access. And the current graduating students were wanting to purchase the hardbound thesis to be cataloged into our library. So the issues, so back up a little bit, so when I first established the ETD, I had students submit a form to me and I would submit it for them. Unfortunately, the keywords weren't working, or the students would not give me as much information that I needed to submit it. So I decided that, well, we'll just let the students submit it. So issues appeared. So students started purchasing other copies. So they didn't understand that there wasn't 2 payments, there was only 1 payment, and only the library could pay for that. They were also selecting copyright registration. So ProQuest actually will help you through the copyright, but at added fee, and our library decided not to pay for that specifically. And then communication with students, I understand probably they'll get 500 emails a day and trying to figure out which one's the important ones. So they weren't really responding to my emails, and students expected the process to be automatic. So as soon as they graduated, they expected it to automatically be open access in thesis. I had a student on Facebook say, like, oh, if my thesis is posted on ProQuest and thesis and dissertation, I'm like, I think it's mission for me, so no. So to combat these issues, I did a step-by-step LibGuide. It's very short, but I had the department chairs actually add this to their Canvas, and haven't had issues since. So I'm glad that I do have a little bit issues people not reading, but that happens. So what was accomplished? So once the religious studies department was in full swing. Other departments figured out as well, because I didn't want to make it too big until I figured out the process and how we could staunch out all the fires that were popping up. But we were able to do that, and some of them actually required it for the students to actually graduate. Our budget request for the business office was accepted. If you know, you know. Super excited about that. And then we submitted 10 theses so far since I think we started in summer 2023 officially. 2 computer science theses and 8 religious studies. So super excited about that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. This is great because you did a little bit of like the heavy lifting, because I'm going to talk a little bit about ProQuest ETD Administrator, and that's a lot to get out of your mouth, so that was a great setting the stage for me. That's fantastic. I'm Scott Bacon. I'm the coordinator of digital initiatives at Coastal Carolina University. And I'm going to talk about electronic theses and dissertations. And I was looking through the past several years of the Charleston Conference programs, and I didn't see a lot of ETD presentations. There's just a few, and then we had one just earlier today. So maybe it's coming back in vogue to talk about as a scholarly communication concept. So yeah, just to give a little bit of a background, I'm going to talk about a workflow that we currently do at Coastal, and then where we were when I was hired. And historically, the library has been the gatekeeper, and so, you know, like you used to have to send your thesis or dissertation to the library, and then they would kind of get their ruler out and measure margins and things like that and send it back. And you'd have to have your bound copies and the stacks, but with the print to digital transformation, there are even workflows now, like of all types, where the library isn't even involved at all in ETD publications. And so that was kind of the situation when I was hired at Coastal in 2012. We didn't have an institutional repository. We didn't have a graduate college. We just had a few graduate master's degrees and graduate program. And so there was kind of a gap between the collaboration between the graduate school and the library. We did have ProQuest ETD Administrator, and so one of the graduate administrators had set that up. Students would upload their stuff there, and then there was an FTP tool where you could push it over to one of your institutional servers and serve web pages. And so that was kind of the access, you know, that provision that we had at that time, and it was kind of clunky, and you know, had to deal with ITS. So maybe the library should get involved. And so our current workflow, as it is, we now in 2024 we have an institutional repository run by the library. We've got a grad college now, and so we're offering more doctoral degrees. We have a graduate college dean, we have assistant and associate deans, and so everything is blowing up. You know, we just hit 11,000 FTE, so everything is going to grow. And how is the library, you know, going to be involved in this? Should our role increase? Can we help streamline things? So what the graduate college did, which I was unaware of, is that they had a new process in perceptive content, which is an internal form system where they track the review process of the theses and dissertations. And so then they would have the student upload from there. After they were accepted, they would upload the ProQuest ETD Administrator, and then I would find that, I would get an email and then upload it to the repository. And so that's not very great because the students have to upload things twice. Nobody likes uploading things once, let alone twice. The reason we got to this situation is because students would call me and say, why isn't my thesis in the repository? And I would say, you know, and I would go in and see ProQuest and say, well, you didn't upload it to ProQuest, and I have to upload it to ProQuest. And so I was doing these, you know, kind of like troubleshooting things. I was like, well, I'm going to contact the graduate college and see what's going on here. And as I said before, you know, we had multiple personnel changes. You know, we have a new dean, the workflows are changing. We also had an overall university website redesign. And so that pretty much, like, some of the pages just kind of got lost and didn't get ported over. There was outdated links, things like that. And so we're trying to fix all that stuff. One of our major goals is also to get consistency across colleges as far as like the workflows from each college, which are a little bit different. And so it'd be nice to get all that, you know, doing better. And so I'm going to be working with the graduate college to continue meetings. I would like to try to eliminate that duplicate data entry that the students have to do. I would like to be made a admin account in the perceptive content system, that form system. I'm gonna see if we can kind of export data from that, import it batch it into ProQuest ETD Administrator, and then ProQuest ETD Administrator just released a tool called Institutional Repository Export. And so that should be able to allow me to export into our Digital Commons formatted spreadsheet that I can patch up to that. So that's a lot of work on my end, but I think it's going to be useful, for the library to get involved in this, to maybe streamline some things that people don't know about, since we do have to use these two systems. But yeah, so the library should get involved because we want to focus on the student experience. Do we really have to have them upload it twice? Well, are there any things that we could do? Are there code snippets? Are there any ways that we could kind of make this process great for them? We even talked about hosting the instructions on our IR, because we were talking about you did a LibGuide, I think, correct? So yeah, you're just kind of like, well, should we put those somewhere easily findable? And that might be helpful. Also providing training for the students at the library, since we have research and scholarship, trainers. And so I guess, just be flexible as a librarian, ask if you can help. People will really appreciate it, and they will thank you for it. So thank you for your time.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Ann Larrabee. I'm a collection strategist at Westchester University Libraries. I should mention as well, I gathered people for this presentation with my colleague Danielle Skaggs, who's another librarian at my institution. And I know what you're thinking when you look at this presentation title, Responding to Collection Needs with Interlibrary Loan. That's nothing new, but let me explain. So first of all, Westchester University is a public university with around 15,000 FTE. Now, we use a single source of funds for one-time collection purchases. I've heard of a couple institutions doing this, but this is quite unique because my previous institutions, they didn't do this. So when I came in, I was panicked, like, okay, I'm used to subject allocations. Every librarian has their own fund. How do I deal with this? And what I found after doing some research is there are some librarians that spend down their funds, but often librarians just depend on what they get requests, curriculum-wise, reserved, and they're not always spending down the one-time funds that we have, albeit pretty limited. But I was worried that maybe our collection isn't sufficient. So my focus of this research was to focus whether limited spending and reliance on interlibrary loan services is sufficiently meeting the needs of our research community, because I wasn't sure if people felt satisfied. So I put out a 5-question survey at the end of October after a long stint with IRB going back and forth. And I targeted researchers at our institution, and I distributed it through librarian emails to the departments, got 46 participants, which included faculty, adjuncts, graduate students, and people identified as staff and graduate students, and 11 departments were represented. So I'm speeding through this data, I know, but I have limited time. So I was pleased to find that most people do use our collections. When I asked about how many people use the Westchester collection holdings, over half said always or most of the time, and about half. And then some said sometimes. There were 2 that said never. This was an adjunct and a graduate student. Adjuncts I found indicated that they don't always do much research, so that could be why. Everyone said they use internet searching for some of the resources. Most said sometimes they use interlibrary loan. I was surprised to see there were very few that use personal informer networks. I thought maybe this is where they're getting their data, and very few purchased materials on their own. I then looked at the trends of interlibrary loan from FY17 to FY24. I didn't want to include partial year with FY25, and found that you see COVID increased our interlibrary loan, but it has gone down slightly. It's back to kind of where it was in FY20, but we're seeing it decline a bit. I also saw this trended with loans and renewals too. We have those COVID years, but then it's way down. And then I'm thinking, are people just using less materials and books and resources? I was wondering if they use many ebooks. So then I found that's slightly down in 2024 as well, with when I look at big ebook packages of EBSCO, JSTOR, and ProQuest that we had. I asked about collection gaps. The ones that like rose to the top, this was an open-ended question, but I coded it as access to specific resources. Some said they wanted some databases. There were some that just said, I'm happy with using ILL, nothing's wrong. There were 2 that said they disliked the ILL wait time, or they had access or interface issue, get filed resources in hand, and then there were 2 that had a complaint of embargo or availability. But otherwise, people didn't identify many gaps. And then I asked if they were satisfied to use ILL when research is not available, and I was pleased to see that most people, especially faculty, were okay with using ILL when we didn't have something in our collections. When I looked at how much frequency there was, most people said 1 to 50% used ILL. And then there were some outliers of, there was one person who used it 91 to 100% of the time, and I was like, oh, are they displeased with the collection? And they didn't indicate it. They just said everything's fine, but they just like using an interlibrary loan. Those that said not aware tended to be people that were adjuncts who just really didn't need the service, or they just hadn't been indicated of the service. When I look at service trends in ARL libraries from 1998 to 2018 for where ILL is going, I'm finding that overall the trend is sloping downwards from especially 2008, where it was way above like 50% from 1998. Now it's going down to 15%, at least among ARL libraries. So I thought that's interesting. It's like, maybe I should do a study on book use. When I look at the literature, I find that some say maybe people aren't using ILL as much because of big package deals, or they're finding things online with open access. There was several studies that canceled big packages and still found that didn't have a negative effect on ILL. So I put some literature there. But in summary, I found some departments and groups may need more information about their access to resources within the library. Those who use ILL often seem to be content using it as an alternative when they're not available. And the survey showed many researchers report on the use of library collections as one of their resources. Thank you very much.
While Amy's pulling up the slide, I will just start. I am Christy Pascal. I am head of acquisitions. This is Amy Freeman. She is the assistant head of acquisitions and scholarly communications. Perfect. In 2021, the University Libraries created the Objectives for Negotiations and Licensing document, which defines our license negotiation priorities. In that document, librarians prioritize computational access and full text content and data mining or harvesting rights for authorized users. To better understand text and data mining permissions in our current license, a working group was appointed to answer questions such as, can I use the content from a particular database for TDM? What are the copyright or licensing restrictions? What tools and services are available through the libraries? Who do I contact about TDM? And how much will it cost? In this session, we'll share the process we undertook to review and analyze text and data mining license permissions and how we made the resulting information and tools available. In step one, we identified approximately 20 publishers. Then we digitized all the licenses and added them to a shared directory. We created a shared spreadsheet to capture license text, license interpretations, contact information, and other information. And we interpreted the contract language to determine our text and data mining allowances and limits. The final spreadsheet includes the following data, and I'm just going to list it because you can't see it all here. Publisher and license, if we found the license in our file, and a scan status for those of you who do licensing, and some licenses get old, may not be there. License expiration date, TDM license language as written in the license, then our interpretation of that license language, TDM access step, general notes, who our vendor contact is, the date we contacted that vendor, notes from that conversation, and the live guide update status. The finished spreadsheet informed two tools for two different audiences. For our librarians, we created a modified version of this spreadsheet in a shared directory that helps them quickly determine our TDM rights for a publisher, and if TDM is allowed, the steps they then need to undertake. In step 2 of the project, we created a patron-facing guide on the library's website for researchers that lists all of the publishers who currently allow TDM, summarizes those uses, and provides library and publisher contact information as applicable.
Okay, so using all of these consideration elements that you see here on the left, we formed a small subgroup, and those librarians identified 6 vendors that we wanted to prioritize working with on text and data mining. So we reached out to each one of those publishers, and we wanted to find out a few things. So first, we asked them to confirm that our interpretation of the text and data mining allowances and limits that we found in their licenses were, in fact, correct. If we found that TDM was allowed in those licenses, we sought some clarification on how exactly a patron could initiate that use. If it wasn't, on the other hand, we worked with that publisher or that vendor to see if there was a way that not the library, but an individual researcher could request permissions to begin a project. And again, what would that workflow look like? What would that cost entail to the researcher or to their grant group? And then, because a lot of times there was a lot of back and forth with these vendors, and what we found was that the person on the vendor side who worked with these sorts of TDM permissions often wasn't the same person as our usual reps. So we wanted to make sure that we had that stable contact information for text and data mining. So overall, we were very, very pleased with the outcomes of this project. Using that spreadsheet that Christy showed you a moment ago, or rather the modified internal one, we now have a way for our liaison librarians and for those who are working on the front line to really quickly respond to patron requests when they needed information on how they could use our licensed content for text and data mining. We also, again, had that patron-facing live guide. That was really nice because it gave our researchers that really fast, automatic way, if they didn't want to contact a librarian right from the start, to find out, 1, what options were available to them, either through library license content or freely available corpora, 2, how they might get started using text and data mining, and 3, what sort of APIs might be available to them either through the vendors or on their own. And very important for us internally, we now have a really nice understanding of how limited our TDM allowances work. So actually only 9 of our licenses that we reviewed did give us any permissions at all for TDM. So we were able to look at some of the resources that we already had, like for example, we worked with HathiTrust Research Center, and then we started a subscription to Ithaca's Consulate, which also helped with some of those resources. So I'll take just a second to talk a little bit about some takeaways and some suggestions. We know it's very, very tempting to jump right on those vendor-authored TDM solutions like TDM Studio, because they're really cool, right? But we also found that the demand on our campus for these uses were pretty minimal, and we knew that our patrons' existing needs could mostly be met through our licenses or those one-on-one interactions that they could have with vendors. That may change, but we may rely a little bit more on things like Consulate and HathiTrust. So that is something in place. And then, of course, you always want to carefully consider your licensing best practices. If this is important to you, make sure that is a conversation that you're having with your vendors and your publishers when you go to negotiate those licenses.
No, it was actually very helpful.
All right, hi everybody. I'm Jesse Holden. I am the program manager for shared content and scholarly communications, the Orbis Cascade Alliance. We are a consortium in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon, Washington, and Moscow, Idaho. Today I'm going to be talking about licenses, but not specifically about, seems to be playing by itself, not specifically about the licenses that we're working on. It's not practical in that particular sense. I'm going to take a slightly different approach and look at instances of ambiguity. So first of all, really quickly, conscious of the time, very quickly to set the broader agenda. I've been looking at the integration of theory into the library profession for about the last 15 years. Profession here defined a calling requiring specialized knowledge and often long and intensive academic preparation. And I list here some strains of thought I followed theoretically through library practice, again, over about the last decade and a half, including the archaeology in the Foucauldian sense of acquisitions, ethics and e-resources, assemblages of library collections, and overall what it looks like when we have a paradigm shift in the library. Worked a lot with licenses, and in particular in the last couple of years with OA and AI most recently, there's been a renewed interest in licensing. In my role, I do work on the consortial licenses. I've worked at a vendor, and I've worked at academic libraries in the past, and have been working with library licenses in various contexts over the years. One question that occurred to me very early on in my career is, why are these licenses in the library? And I will hopefully have enough time to come back to that. So what is a license, right? Obviously, it's a legal framework, but it's also a couple of other things, and I think this is important in regards to the last question. It's a communication medium. Let's use the word mechanism here. I think either one works. More and more, and I think very importantly, licenses are, should be, can be value statements. And then we have a small pod in our consortium led by some of our member staff, the recently released Open Access O'Neill project. It's an open licensing curriculum. And in one of the early definition units in that course curriculum, the license was defined as a relationship management tool, and that really resonated with me. So, pivoting from the legal and looking at the library license as text. Obviously, it has legal obligations in it and a lot of technical language, but it also has a lot of other things, right? Besides those values I mentioned before, it contains expectations, exceptions, various considerations, and concerns. And all those are very broad-based, but it's just going beyond the legal and looking at the practical from a very high-level general sense. So licenses are multivalent, there's many levels, and they're nuanced. Despite the precision of language, the language itself is a very important factor in what the license does and doesn't do. So what do we get? Again, we get that nuance, we get interpretation, and again, looking at it as a text rather than a legal instrument, there's flexibility. I'm going to come back to that too. Looking at it as a text, you don't necessarily have to focus on the legal authority and where that's coming from. You don't necessarily need legal advice, and it's not necessarily as rigid as it first seems. So, how can we think differently about licenses, again, through this textual lens? And I'm using a couple of theoretical apparatuses. The first is a method called deconstruction. We hear that word a lot, pioneered by the French philosopher Derrida. In terms of licenses, very generally, we're talking about a close reading, looking for contradictions, or what Derrida calls the aporias, and traces and absences throughout the document and throughout a lineage of documents. I also look at it through the lens of assemblage theory, which is Delanda's adaptation of Deleuze with a little bit of Foucault in there. So that's looking at the conceptual relations of the components of the license and the license as a whole, the interaction of those pieces in multiple strata, and patterns of connections in between. So this is going to have to go really quick. So just a reminder that literary theory is not legal advice. I'm not advising anybody here to do anything. So really quick, the instances of ambiguity. Well, I can't do a full text analysis in a short 6 minutes. Some ambiguity in licenses. First of all, most obviously to many of you who work with them, silence, an omission. So when you don't have a fixed term, you create a space for dialogue. Words with multiple meanings. In one example, you can write a text on an AI system, but does that mean about or does that mean using? It's open to interpretation. contradiction when I'm in a consortium and I'm a customer as a consortium and all the members who subscribe are customers. That language can actually become confusing if it's not used precisely and consistently throughout the license, and that creates an opportunity, sometimes a conflict. And finally, amicability. When you just put in a term, agree to discuss, keeping the avenue open for that dialogue. So I think I'm done, but when you look at the slides, I do come back. Why licenses in the library, and what about ambiguity? Just to sum up really quickly, has a very important role. That's why it's with librarians, not with the lawyers. And ambiguity is both a strategy and a risk. And I've got a very brief bibliography here. When you get the slides, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.